Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, Wall Street enters this final day of the trading week in record fashion. The S&P 500 notched its 39th all-time high of 2024, extending this year's surge to about 20%. Julian Emanuel is Senior Managing Director of Equity, Derivatives, and Quant Strategy at Evercore ISI. He remains bullish.
We do continue to be very positive into year end, and so far 25 looks good to us as well. Part of this narrative again is the Fed's behind us. We have earnings that will once again, when the reports start in a couple of weeks, confirm the fact that second quarter was not an anomaly, that yes, the other 493 stocks in the S&P 500 are growing their earnings.
Julian Emanuel at Evercore ISI thinks the S&P 500 can close the year at 6,000. That's about 5% away from current levels.
Well, Nathan, it could be a volatile day to close out the trading week. Today's the quarterly options expiration known as triple witching, and Bloomberg Markets reporter Jess Menton is following that.
It'll be about $5.1 trillion in options that would be tied to individual stocks, indexes, and exchange-free traded funds there that are going to be falling off the board if you look at the estimates there. So that could cause for a bit of swings there, also overlapping with the rebalance that will be happening. So you'll have Dell and Palantir that will be replacing Etsy as well as American Airlines in the S&P 500 before trading on Monday. So you could see some pop there when it comes to volatility as well as some volume heading into the closing bell.
Bloomberg Markets reporter Jess Menton says the event has a reputation for causing sudden price moves as contracts disappear and traders roll over their existing positions or start new ones.
Oh, Karen, shares of FedEx are plunging this morning, and Bloomberg's John Tucker's following that. John, looks like FedEx isn't really delivering for investors this morning.
Yes, Nathan, you could say. I wouldn't, but you could. Shares down over 13% right now, pre-market. The company lowering its annual outlook for adjusted earnings per share and also revenue growth. Their customers looking for cheaper options, in particular FedEx pointing to a drop in priority shipments between businesses. This is seen as a bellwether for the broader U.S. economy. The company now expects revenue for fiscal 2025 to grow by a low single-digit percentage. A company also, interestingly enough, ending its work for the U.S. Postal Service, its largest customer, and expects a $500 million headwind from the loss of that contract. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, on the flip side, shares of Nike are up almost 7% this morning. The company has ousted beleaguered chief executive John Donahoe. It's bringing longtime executive Elliott Hill out of retirement in a bid to return the struggling athletic brand to its glory days.
Now, Bloomberg exclusive, Karen. Johnson & Johnson is boosting its offer to settle thousands of lawsuits by people who say that the company's baby powder gave them cancer. Sources say the new offer is $8.2 billion, an increase from J&J's previous $6.5 billion bid. Under the new terms, claimants could get bigger payouts and about $650 million in legal fees covered.
Well, in Europe, Nathan, shares of Mercedes going in reverse. The stock down 7%. The German automaker cut its financial forecast for the year. It blames rapid deterioration of its business in China.
And elsewhere in Asia, Karen, the Bank of Japan is keeping monetary policy steady. The BOJ is signaling no need to hurry with interest rate hikes. You may recall the bank increased rates in July, and its hawkish views spooked investors.
Now, Nathan, let's go to the latest in the presidential race. And Vice President Kamala Harris is looking for a campaign lift with star power.
Kamala Harris!
Oprah Winfrey hosted a live-streamed rally for the vice president in Michigan. The Unite for America event featured celebrities like Julia Roberts, Jennifer Lopez, and Chris Rock, and ordinary Americans sharing their experiences with gun violence and abortion restrictions. Harris says she hopes to be a unifying president.
This movement that is about reminding each other that we have so much more in common than what separates us is so critically important. And this is about the strength of who we are as Americans.
And Harris repeated promises to offer tax breaks to start-up businesses, to sign the bipartisan immigration bill, and to restore federal abortion rights.
Well, Donald Trump, meanwhile, is promising to bring back his travel ban on mostly Muslim countries and expand it to keep refugees from Gaza out of the U.S. Former president appeared at an event in Washington hosted by Republican donor Miriam Adelson.
My promise to Jewish Americans is this: with your vote, I will be your defender, your protector, and I will be the best friend Jewish Americans have ever had in the White House.
Trump went on to say Israel has to defeat Kamala Harris. Speaking of Jewish Americans, he said, quote, "There's no way that I should be getting 40% of the vote. I'm the one who is protecting you."
Well, Nathan, one of the political candidates that Trump has endorsed is in the spotlight this morning. North Carolina Republican gubernatorial nominee Mark Robinson is vowing to remain in the race. It comes after CNN reported Robinson posted strongly worded racial and sexual comments on an online message board. Robinson says he won't be forced out by salacious tabloid lies.
Now, Karen, let's turn to developments in the Middle East. Israel carried out extensive airstrikes across southern Lebanon yesterday, calling it a new phase of its conflict with Hezbollah. It comes after an attack in the region in which pagers and other devices exploded, leaving dozens dead. Speaking through an interpreter, Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah promised retaliation.
We know that our enemy has superiority, and we have never once said anything other than that. Superiority on the technological level. Because it is not just the Israelis. The Americans are with Israel, and the West is with them.
Those comments from Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah yesterday. This wave of explosions of wireless devices in southern Lebanon has left more than 30 dead, thousands injured. Israel has neither claimed nor denied responsibility.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good Friday morning, Michael.
Thank you very much, Karen. Good morning to you as well. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's not going to wait for the House to try and pass a government funding bill. It comes as a government shutdown is looming in the weeks before the election. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports.
Senator Schumer says he will set up a vote for next week, this after the House failed to get it done this week. The hang-up being the GOP attaching the citizenship voting rider pushed by Donald Trump. Lawmakers like Republican David Kustoff say it has to be done.
I voted for the bill to fund the government through March, which the SAVE Act was attached to it, which prohibits non-citizens from voting. But in the end, we do not need a government shutdown. We need the government to continue to function.
House Speaker Johnson has not announced the next step. He's seeking input, including that from Donald Trump. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
A Kentucky judge was shot and killed in his chambers, and the suspected shooter is a sheriff. State police say 43-year-old Sheriff Sean Steins of rural Lecter County shot District Judge Kevin Mullins after an argument inside the county courthouse. Mullins, who is 54, was pronounced dead at the scene. State Police Trooper Matt Gayhart.
Anytime a situation like this takes place, especially in a small town, it shakes the very foundation of what the town is, and this is no different. We're just hoping that it's a bad situation, that we can resolve it as quickly as possible and start that process forward.
Trooper Gayhart says Sheriff Stein surrendered without incident and is charged with first-degree murder. Texas police confirm human remains were found inside of an SUV pulled from the site of the pipeline fire that has been burning since Monday. Officials believe the vehicle crashed into a valve and sparked the fire on the border of Deer Park and LaPorte. The fire melted cars, inciting off homes, and destroyed a playground. Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo.
Many of them don't want to live there anymore. They're scared of the area. The playground right next to the homes is totally charred, gray. A lot of it is sort of burnt down.
Judge Lena Hidalgo, the fire is out after they capped the valve and welded it shut. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John.
All right, Karen, when Zach Wilson was trying to play quarterback for the Jets, he made playing QB in the NFL look like it was a really hard thing to do. Aaron Rodgers makes it look really easy. Finding the right receiver, slinging it to him precisely where it needs to go. Rodgers in the Jets home opener versus New England looked very much like he did during those MVP seasons in Green Bay.
He takes the snap, drops back, screen left, caught Lazard, makes a man miss, at the 5, looking for the pylon, reaches it out, he's in, that's a Jet touchdown. Rodgers takes the snap, play action, looks right, pumps once, throws right, caught, front right pylon, Garrett Wilson, that's a Jet touchdown.
On WAXQ, Jets beat the Patriots 24-3. Rodgers was 27 of 35, 281 yards in those 2 touchdowns. We'll get to the pennant races, but first, Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers' 20-4 win at Miami that clinched them a playoff berth. Ohtani, 6 for 6, 2 doubles, 3 home runs, 2 stolen bases. The Dodgers' team record, 10 runs batted in. He now has 51 homers on the season and 51 steals. While the Dodgers scored 20, Mets scored 10 for the 3rd night in a row. Beat the Phillies at Citi Field 10-6. Atlanta and Arizona also won, so it's still the Mets and D-backs tied. The Braves 2 games behind. Cleveland clinched at least a wild card. Will now try to win the AL Central just as the playoff-bound Yankees try to wrap up the AL East. Their magic number 6. Yanks lost in Seattle 3-2. Mariners scored all 3 in the first inning. They were helped by Jason Dominguez dropping a fly ball. Orioles beat the Giants. Red Sox held a 1-hit and a 2-0 loss at Tampa Bay. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Karen Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. We wanted now to take a deeper dive into Kamala Harris's plan for the economy. In today's episode of the Big Take DC podcast, Bloomberg California Bureau Chief Karen Breslau and Washington reporter Josh Wingrove join host Sarah Holder. They began with a question about Harris's claim that she's building an opportunity economy. Let's listen in.
She's talking about equity, and this is stitched through a lot of the things that she's done. If you look into her record, things that have animated her in her time as vice president and before include making sure that people who want to start small businesses, in particular people of color who want to start small businesses, have access to capital. I think we'd be missing part of the story if we don't draw that link between what she sees as fundamental sort of inequities. If certain business proposals are hitting a wall because minority lenders don't have the money to get to them and big lenders aren't giving them the time of day, she sees that as something worth tackling. You see it with her call for a wider child tax credit. Harris, in particular, has talked about $6,000 in a tax credit for people who have a baby, in the first year of a child's life. As a father of a young child, I can attest to how expensive that can be, let me tell you.
Well, I want to understand where that focus on equity and opportunity really comes from. Karen, you first spoke with Harris back in 2005, and you've interviewed her over the years since then.
Thank you to the Attorney General of California, Kamala Harris. Thank you all.
That was from a 2012 interview you did with her in Sacramento for an organization called She Shares. You've really seen her full arc on the political stage. What do you see as her most consistent priority? We're seeing things like that call for a child tax credit that Josh mentioned. What is the through line that really drives her?
It's clearly kids. There is something at every turn in her career and in her life. She has come around to who are the powerless, who are the voiceless, right? Her messaging has been all over the place. But in terms of how do you use power, whether it's the power of a prosecutor, whether it's the power of a regulator, whether it's economic power, who's it going to benefit? And she always would ask people, how's this going to play on the streets? If it's a mortgage settlement, are these loans going to be forgiven? How are these loan discharges going to affect whether it's students, whether it's homeowners? Where does the money end up? She sees power fundamentally from the outside in and from the bottom up. She was an outsider in San Francisco politics. She came from Oakland, from Berkeley, just across the bay, but a world apart, right? San Francisco is a clubby, democratic city where power is dynastic. It's connected to families, the Pelosi's, Gavin Newsom, the current governor, who was her frenemy coming up in San Francisco politics. But now it is very different. She is the sitting vice president.
And this is one of the trickiest things, is Harris is campaigning both as an incumbent and as a change agent, right? For instance, political history is littered with people who make pledges about housing starts and don't get anywhere near them. She's proposed expanding assistance, it would require Congress, to first-time home buyers to $25,000. And we're talking direct subsidy is what she wants to do. She wants to talk about building 3 million new units of housing over the course of her first term. The Republicans then turn around and say, the price of housing has gone up under the Biden-Harris administration. You're in the government now. Why don't you do something about it?
Josh, you spoke about the challenge Harris faces, running both as this change maker and as an incumbent. The Fed cut rates by 0.5 percentage point, which indicates that they feel like inflation is getting under control. But under the current Biden-Harris administration, many Americans say they aren't feeling good about the economy, that gas and grocery prices are too high. What has Harris said about addressing inflation?
Harris has chalked a lot of this up to corporate greed and said that grocery companies and chains and food providers are, in her mind, colluding to keep prices high. Essentially, she is trying to not take the blame. Breaking from Biden is something that's tricky for her, right? She's not going to want to stab him in the back, but there are differences. She's a 59-year-old who grew up in the Bay Area. He's an 81-year-old raised in Claymont, Delaware, just outside of Philadelphia. They see the world differently. One thing that has struck us traveling with her is Harris does not really go to like manufacturing places. Biden loves going anywhere with a hard hat. She doesn't. She goes to small businesses. She goes to like a spice store.
I finally got out of the debate prep to look at these spices. Best part of debate prep so far.
Biden sees manufacturing as this sort of silver bullet for a litmus test on how the economy is doing. I think for Harris, if you had to pick one, you'd pick small businesses. If they are thriving, she thinks the economy is doing well.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.